Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another episode of Inspirate, the show that's here to enlighten you, to inspire you, to empower you, to provide hope. At the same time, we need to look at the challenges we face as a community, as an ummah, as humanity. And we on the series around developing a new socio-economic paradigm. Why? We have been ravaged by this pandemic, this virus, the COVID-19 pandemic, and it has unshackled our very existence. The very world that we live in is no longer the same. Every facet from a social perspective, from an economic perspective, has been disrupted. There has been deaths that we've seen, close friends, family that we've lost. People are losing jobs. People are losing their businesses. And we're hearing a lot of doom and gloom. The question now is, what can we do differently? Or can we do things differently? We have two esteemed panelists, Yusuf Patel, a good friend of mine, who used to be my Amir, actually, my leader at Wits University. He was the head of the MSA. And welcome to studio, Yusuf.
Thank you, Yusuf. It's a pleasure to be on here. And assalamu alaikum to everyone, all the viewers, and to Lumkile as well.
Yes, we have Lumkile. Ironically, we were both at Wits, and Lumkile is a senior lecturer at Wits University, an economist, a person who I also know very well. I was very fortunate to share a meal at his place, one of the great cooks as well, besides being an academic and an economist. So yes, we've got a serious topic to discuss, redesigning a global world, a socio-economic paradigm that's different from what has happened to date. And specifically, we want to talk about this aspect of globalization, which has brought us to where we are, and its great advances. And now people are talking about, and people were talking about this, if you listen to Donald Trump and certain nationalist agendas, we're talking about a more localization element. Let's discuss this further, and let's discuss maybe some of the issues currently with what has happened with the world that has gotten us to this point, some of its advances, some of its challenges. I'll start off with Yusuf.
I think, Yusuf, the issue really is, we're talking about globalization. And globalization has really been with us for centuries. The problem now is that globalization facilitates movement of people, exchange of ideas, knowledge, culture, trade. So it has its benefits and advantages. But the challenge with it is we know it is been highly exploitative. And it's created a lot of challenges for many countries because it's impacting on people on the ground. So issues around, and I think with COVID-19, it's accentuated some of the problems that we have on the ground, issues around poverty, unemployment, inequality, I think at a global level, but also within different countries. And I think the issue is, it's not about delinking from the world, because the other option is then full localization, where we say, okay, as a country, let's go it by ourselves. I think we got to be realistic, and we're part of a global economy. But the issue is really, how do we begin to change and redeem this global economy and make it more inclusive and more equitable? And I think, from a entire civil society point of view, across society, I think we need to begin to look at a relook and a rethink. And this is where, some of the initiatives we involve with organizations like Musa, Movement for United South Africa, we're beginning to say, let's look at a new socio-economic paradigm, and let's do a reset in terms of how we begin to look at the global humanity, because that's what we need. We need solidarity. This is a time where we're saying we can reshape the world. It's an opportunity. As much as we're in a crisis, it's an opportunity for us to say, let's redesign our future. But it's got to be on the basis of a new socio-economic model, socio-economic justice, and a new paradigm that is inclusive.
Yes, Lumkile, on that point, right, just as what Yusuf was saying, can we actually reshape this world? Or are human beings such that we get a crisis and then we start reflecting, we introspect, we say, let's do something different, and then things get back to normal, and then we go back to our norm? Can we reshape the world? And from an economist perspective, if you can shed some light onto the matter.
Thank you, Yusuf, and good day to all the viewers. I think capitalism has shown us that it's a very exploitative system that has led to the inequality that Yusuf was describing, and therefore is exposed to various periods of crashes. And unfortunately, unlike the 2008 crisis, this crisis has been brought by pandemic. So I think that despite all the challenges that we face in the world, where because each and every country in the world is facing the pandemic, also inwardly, inequality is deep within countries and between countries. That has pushed some countries to look inwardly. We've seen with Trump's USA, we saw with Brexit, but that's not a solution. I think a solution rests to change the whole system that has defined the economic global system, capitalism. We've seen how corporations are now shifting, who have been major beneficiaries with the state in the history of capitalism. Many of them are changing. They are now focusing on their workers first, ensuring that they pay better, their working conditions are better, and as well as they pay for pension and medical care. So at a corporate level, there are slow shifts that we're seeing. And I believe that corporations have a bigger role in shaping the economy. The second area where I believe there's an opportunity is also about us as households. That capitalism had forced us to be individual, has separated family. It's about time that families build and stick together in the old version of what we called an extended family, because at least that extended family de-risks the impact of the COVID. We know that in many families, breadwinners have lost their jobs, and if they stay alone, they're not going to be able to come back and work and look for a new job. So we need to relook at the old ways of living, where the economy is about the well-being. It's no longer about money. It's about the well-being of my household and bigger society. So I play a role at home with my loved ones and relatives, but also we play a role as a collective to the community that we live in, and then to the bigger society. So I'm foreseeing that movement and that change taking place if we are going to create a better world, a world free of poverty and inequality, an economic system that addresses the needs of the many, not the few, as capitalism has shown us.
Yes, that sums up a lot of what the ills are of capitalism. I think, both of you have actually brought a lot of this aspect, and I think what comes out glaringly evident is this income inequality. I mean, we cannot sustain a world where we have the haves that are in a minority that are enjoying the riches of the world, and you have this large population globally that's suffering. And I think that's what the pandemic has done for us. And that's the reason for why we're sitting here, is can we usher in something new? But at the same time though, we cannot ignore the gains of capitalism or the gains of globalization, right? I mean, many talk about the fact that through this globalization, we've grown the global economy and we've taken a lot of people out of poverty, all right? Just on that light, what would you say, Yusuf?
No, it's true that, I mean, you know, there's many benefits, and I mean, if you look, I think if you look at even the global population, you know, within a span of 50 to 100 years, the size of the global population has increased dramatically, probably from around 1.5 billion maybe 100 years ago to today, where we're talking of 7.5 billion people. Now that alone means that we need to begin to look at ways in which we look at global governance, in ways within countries we create inclusive systems, because we now need to make sure that the world works, that we create a fair system, and we shift the focus to the poor and the most vulnerable. And we have to begin to say, how do we get the world to work for the poorest of the poor, so that we're able to have proper safety nets, we're able to create sustainable livelihood opportunities, look at investing in education, skills and talent development. And there has to be that kind of shift to say, how do people afford basic needs, goods and services? If you look at across the globe, so yes, whilst we've had benefits, we've had a rise, the middle class has also grown, you know, across the world, but at the same time, the gap with the poorest of the poor has been increasing. And I don't think we're looking at it sufficiently from a policy point of view. I think at a global governance point of view, because many of the disruptions in different countries are also caused by the way value chains, economic value chains are run at a global level. You know, looking at various policies, the trade policies, which are often very unfair, very exploitative, and all of those things have a direct impact within particular countries and in keeping people marginalized in particular countries. So we have to begin to address those issues.
Okay, we'll look, I think you brought a lot of points around the policy and how that can be impacted. I mean, South Africa, for example, we know we pride ourselves on some of the best policies, but yet we still see all of the problems. Let's discuss that immediately after the break.
You inspire me to be the best. You inspire me to be the best.
Welcome back. We're on a very, very interesting topic, localization versus globalization, ushering a new socio-economic paradigm. Just before the break, we were talking about this inequality that the world is facing, our country specifically. If we just look, we're probably one of the most unequal societies in the world. Yet, and Yusuf was talking about policies, and I want to bring Lumkile in here. We're talking, you know, when we speak of South Africa, from '94, with the advent of democracy, we pride ourselves on the fact that we have created some of the best policies. I mean, these were policies that were meant to address inequality. We came from a fractured society. We had a minority few in the time of apartheid that had all the resources. There was a large black population that was disenfranchised. So we knew about income inequality, about inequality from a race and political perspective since '94. Yet, 26 years into democracy, we're still sitting with the same problem. And yet we've had policies like the BEE policies, affirmative action policies, to be able to address these imbalances. Why are we still sitting in this problem? Has it been a problem of poor implementation? Lumkile?
So South Africa is very interesting because the structure of the South African economy has not changed. Remember, the economy is dominated by white businesses and white corporations. And in doing so, they have closed the space for black entrepreneurs. As a result, the ANC government embarked on social processes, which the defining moment being the creation of a black elite that includes all of us in this discussion. And unfortunately, that elite went to bed with miners, a lot of the big mining companies, as well as politicians, in dispossessing many rural black communities who are endowed with mineral resources, and basically impoverished those hundreds of, if not thousands, of black village South Africans because of their mineral wealth. So the South African case is very unique in the sense that you now have an elite who are very much reliant on state policies as well as state-owned enterprises. Excuse me. Excuse me. So they're reliant on state enterprises as well as government for jobs and tenders. In the process, the poor have got nowhere to go and are dependent on the elite to deliver those services. And what we've seen is that the poor have been pushed far backward because of a lack of services and a lack of delivery of basic services, whether it's electricity, water. So what South Africa needs, as Yusuf was saying earlier, is inclusive growth or inclusive development. And part of that has to speak to a universal basic income grant to try and sustain incomes of those that are marginalized, those that we as an elite, as a black elite, have benefited and were the ones that have undermined the delivery of services to them through corruption as well as rent seeking. So South Africa really has got a much deeper problem than at least many other countries, where in fact there are resources in South Africa, but those resources are being captured by a white business elite and a black elite, and the poor are continuously being pushed against the wall. Hence, a call for universal income grant to try and help the poor so they don't get marginalized continuously as the others benefit.
Yes, at the same time, what I want to say is that is this not an issue that is not unique to South Africa, is what I'm trying to say. Is that because we fit in a global economic system, is it not the global economic system that's the problem that has created this income inequality, that has created this marginalization? So even with good intent, politicians' good intent, the ANC government's good intent, to be able to want to do, let's keep the corruption aside. If we look at wanting to readdress the imbalances, you're just going against the grain because the system is too loaded against the have-nots. It's suited for an elite class to be created, and so perpetuates this gap between the rich and the poor. Yusuf?
Yeah, look, I think it's true. I mean, the global system, the global economic system, the global financial system works to marginalize people, right? So the whole way the system is designed, the flow of capital, all of that works through your financial, your banking structures and that in a particular way, and it follows. It follows particular routes in terms of who gets access to capital and finance. And that's the biggest challenge we're facing, is that often it's micro, small businesses, family-owned businesses, people on the ground that actually need access to capital to be able to, to generate businesses, run, deal with their sustainable livelihoods, etc. But so there is a challenge in terms of how the whole system is working and requires reform. But also the thing is, we have to begin to do the right things. And it cannot be an excuse where within the scope of the system, we need to make sure that within limited resources we can use it in the best possible way. But I think the bigger issue is how are we going to change these things both at a global level as well as within different countries in our own country. how do we get people to start doing the right thing? And that talks to, yes, we need new economic paradigms in it, because the current system is also flowing in a way in which it's incentivizing all the wrong things. So whether you look at climate change, the environment, inequality, the system is designed in a way to perpetuate those problems and challenges. So we need to re-incentivize and change ways and look at new economic paradigms. So and as Lumkile was saying, the new economic paradigm is about societal well-being, right? It's not just about financial and profit at all cost. And we have to begin to recost how we actually fund business plans and projects, because we're actually not taking in the actual costs of the environment, the actual costs of inequality, and we're not factoring it in those business models. And I think when we start factoring it in those business models, it's going to allow us to begin to relook at things differently. But the main point is, with everything in place, we need to get people to start doing the right thing across all levels of society, whether it's in government, it's in business, in civil society, in the religious sector. We need to start getting everybody to start doing the right thing. And that talks to, it's about a new economic paradigm, but we're also going to reset our ethics and our moral ethics and our grounding. To begin to say, we need to start saying, how do we build a new consciousness and a new awareness about starting to do the right thing and working and shifting to ensure that we're uplifting everybody. And we're uplifting everybody materially, also ethically and spiritually. And we're beginning to build a new kind of humanity, but we're building individuals and human beings that can live to the best of what they can do in terms of contributing to humankind. So I think that shift is talking to us at a personal level, at family levels, community levels, as well as at levels of nation states and at the global level as well.
Look, as much as you say that, and we know that this is an ideal that we would like to strive for, many skeptical people, right? And I want to play a bit of devil's advocate. Many skeptical people would say that isn't this too far-fetched, right? Aren't we as human beings built in such a way that it's this winner takes all, right? And this is maybe why we're in this problem that we're in. That's why you create these large oligopolies or monopolies that control. If you take every sector of economies, oil sector is controlled by a few, the banking sector is controlled by a few, agriculture is such, and people are, and the whole advent of globalization means that it's about bigger is better. So as long as I win the race, then I'm great, right? And then I make all the money and push it into all these beautiful financial instruments that create even greater wealth, and that's just the way the world is. So can we really change? That's the question. I hear what you guys are saying about inclusiveness. I hear what you're saying about what we see as this income inequality of the social deprivation, but can we really change? This moral, ethical discussion that we're having, can we really change, Mlumkile?
We can change. And the first point of call will be the recognition that those conglomerates that you were alluding to have done humanity wrong. What am I saying? What I'm saying is that if you look at your typical multinational corporation, got access to resources by the gun, in simple terms. They got it unfairly. So we need a recognition of injustice. And that injustice talks to reparation, that those corporations that have wronged many communities need to make good of the wrongs. And that discussion is taking place in various quarters around a just and equal world. So if we take that as a point as a starting point, and you take it to South Africa, similar conversation in South Africa, that the wealth of many white people was built on injustice.
Lumkile, I'm just going to stop.
Truth and reconciliation.
Lumkile, I'm going to stop you there. Let's just take a break, And we have to continue on this, creating this just and equitable world. I love what you're saying there. Let's explore that further in the next section, immediately after the break.
You inspire me to be the best. You inspire me to be the best.
Welcome back. We're on section 3, segment 3 of this highly informative, highly insightful discussion on designing a new paradigm, a new socioeconomic paradigm. Lumkile, you were talking about and leading to what Yusuf was saying around this inclusiveness, around this just and equitable, a moral and ethical socio-economic world that we can live in, right? I asked the question, can it be achieved? Being a skeptical, from skeptics' perspective, you were very vehement, Lumkile, you said it can be achieved. So let's just get into a little bit of the how, right? How can we usher in this new paradigm, this that addresses this imbalances and the social deprivation? Lumkile?
So it starts with corporations. As we know, many of the corporations are now controlled by institutional investors. And in the discussion around climate change, the climate change alone has to be seen in the light of a much broader, just transition. Therefore, the reparation of the wrongs of the past has to start and be driven by these institutions. Of course, in civil society, outside the corporation, but also in the South African context, given that wealth to white people was built on black labor exploitation and laws that dispossessed many South Africans of land and access to opportunities. That recognition has to come first, and acceptance that they did wrong and benefited immensely. And in doing so, they are prepared to contribute a particular tax percentage as a form of reparation of their wrongs and the benefits that they inherited at the expense of my grandfather and many of my relatives who died underground, who died in the forced removals, and nothing was done about that. So I'm saying it's a conversation that's required. And I think if we're honest about it, we can really build a just and inclusive society. But it starts with me, it starts with those sit on boards and initial investors about creating this new dynamic, inclusive and equitable economy and a better society and a better world.
It's a care-based. I mean, I'm hearing what you're saying is there's empathy, there's care. There's those that have done wrong, owning up to the wrongs, saying, okay, there's some sort of reparation, right? Let's build in anew because we can't continue with the same paradigm, but let's do it in an inclusive way. How would you see that inclusive world? What would it look like, Yusuf?
Yeah, I think that is the biggest challenge because I think we always good at knowing what the problems in it are. And I think as Lumkile has pointed to it, the bigger challenge is, and I think that's what, and I think that's where the hope lies in actually envisioning a different kind of future and a different kind of world. That is, and it has to be based on the socioeconomic justice that Lumkile is talking about. That's got to be the framework that guides that new vision. Because if we take that framework, then we can begin to say, how do we build a world where there's well-being for everyone? It's inclusive right across the board. The economies that are created and designed, because quite frankly, we can do this. It's all about design. The world that we're living in today was designed post-World War II, right? So we're sitting with the impact of the world that came out of all the agreements out of World War II, even the financial systems that we're sitting with. The inequities in terms of currencies and trade and all of that is now brought about by that whole system, right? So if we take a socioeconomic justice framework, we begin to look at the basis of how we reorganize and reorientate. And we then enable and ensure that we're talking about building a world of true compassion. So it's changing our entire value system around how we look at the economy, how we measure the economy. And many places are already beginning to do this. You know, we've got a typical unit of measure where we measure gross, product, right?
The GDP.
The
Yeah.
GDP measure, right? Which is all about productivity. So we've become a society where we just measure, all we're measuring is how much we're producing, what that production actually does, how it's produced, how it impacts on the environment, how it's made and who actually gets involved in the making of goods and products, etc., and the kind of exploitation, etc., that surrounds some of that. We don't talk about it, we don't measure that. But we can begin to talk about measuring prosperity, well-being, happiness, and we create financial and monetary systems that enable communities that can start stimulating, even from the bottom up, community level production. We start building sustainable livelihoods. We enable access to microfinance. We can do things even at interest-free levels if we need to for micro businesses, small businesses. We can adjust the financial systems to enable us to make sure that the things we really need in our societies, we're focusing our production on that. So COVID has actually shown us that, where we can actually start saying, what does society really need? At the moment, we need shelter, we need housing, we need affordable housing. How do we begin to shift things and shift the economy and the financial system towards the goods and services that society really needs? And within that process, actually empower our communities to become part of those production systems through micro enterprises, small businesses, community level kind of production.
But those are some very practical steps, Lumkile. And I mean, small business is a key driver of the economy, right? And we've marginalized small businesses. The truth is, if you look at COVID and you look at what has happened, you've seen that the wealthy have gotten wealthier. You're looking at the guys in the top 10 wealthiest have, I think, amassed a tremendous wealth over this period. And you're looking at, I was reading something and they said at least a third of South Africa's middle class has been wiped out. And these were business people working at small businesses, etc. The system, and I bring that up, is that the entire system has to be changed. The banking system needs to be changed to be allowed to be maybe more risk averse, right? Or more risk takers, less risk averse, right? In a sense that allow for those that don't have the means. Because the truth is, if I have, I'm just going to gain more, right? The reality is in South Africa, if a white person goes to the bank and asks, because they've got some collateral and assets, they're able to get funding. A black man doesn't have that. Lumkile, you were saying about the reparation. This is where land becomes critical. So again, how do we practically address these imbalances? Lumkile, some points?
So this speaks to the importance of developing local institutions. So in South Africa, there's been a discussion around the state bank, which I think is important. It is important in the sense that if it's got branches in communities and the bank manager lives in that community, understand that Yusuf is coming from a family that's moralistic, that's got ethics, that is committed and invests in that community, and therefore I can extend a loan to Yusuf. So we start there, because in the current system, whether we legislate or not, your typical transactor lives in the suburb or lives in an urban area. So if you are peri-urban or rural, you find it very difficult to convince someone that will be able to pay back. So the dynamics that are required in this new transformation for an inclusive and just society requires that thinking around that. Because in our history, Yusuf, we know, at least we experienced, particularly in the period of segregation, that during segregation, because your business person, your banker, and everyone else lived in the same area. Everyone knew one another. And I'm calling for redevelopment of those institutions. Of course, after 1994, a lot of that capability left and went to live elsewhere. So many communities were starved of that capability. So one that coming back somehow, but coming indigenously and organically from these communities, because only those communities that understand the challenges of business, understand the challenges that we have on logistics within the community, crime and others, where we can redevelop inclusive and better societies.
You know, I, as you were speaking, I was just thinking that it's so ironical that globalization has given us this one world, that we're interconnected, right? I mean, right now, anybody out in the world can be listening to this discussion. Yet at the same time, what we're speaking here is that going back to community, that we're so connected, yet so adrift from each other. And those principles of, I'm hearing again, inclusiveness, community, communal, it's about those values, about working together. If you look at most successful communities that have built wealth and economic freedom, has been through working together, right? One may not have, and they're using the resources of the other, and we're building it. And maybe that is the opportunity, you know, around community development, using the natural resources of that area as its wealth creation right across the world.
I think absolutely. I mean, if we're talking of a new socio-economic model, it's got to be an element of it. Obviously, the state is going to be important to facilitate, you know, in ensuring, for example, even issues like infrastructure are developed in a proper way, cost efficiently, so that we also enabling that the services within the economy can be provided in you know, in the cheapest possible manner, because that is going to stimulate economy. But we also got to make sure that we putting support systems in place where we can stimulate and activate this sort of community-driven development. We can stimulate community and local level economies. We're able to create, you know, so it's all about creating local trust, local solidarity systems, because that's exactly what Lumkile is saying, that through that you can actually begin to look at skills development, you look at, you know, communities, local areas, regions within countries, they can begin to actually look at their own competitive advantages that they can create in their local areas by looking at, you know, producing local product, but also creating community service systems, you know, integrated human settlements, where we're talking of real integration across different services. You're talking of integrated development within communities across social, economic, you know, all those forms of development, but beginning to look at also development of the soul and the human being. So we've taken this whole part out of the whole development paradigm. If you look at many countries, we're talking about our country and policies in it. Yes, a lot of good policies, we still need to fine tune and do a lot more on the policy front, but a large part of it is about implementation. And what we've also taken out of implementation is the whole focus on the human being. When we're talking of common communities, we're talking of people, human beings, that we need to focus on the holistic development of our societies, including the material, ethical, spiritual development of our societies. And I think because we've taken all of that out, we've created a very mechanical society. Everything is about just the production and the winner takes all, etc. And for me, going back into the communities, looking at how we can actually at local levels begin to reknit and restructure and reorganize. But we need the states also. We need a developmental states with that kind of orientation that can also provide the kind of facilitation and support for this.
Now, great. Let's discuss this inclusive model in our last segment immediately after the break.
You inspire me to be the best. You inspire me to be
welcome to the last segment of this fascinating discussion. I want to go straight to it. Lumkile, I'm going to start with you. Right, your parting words around how you'd see this inclusive new paradigm, new socio-economic paradigm unravel itself. How would you see this happening? Your parting words.
President Cyril Ramaphosa is calling for a new compact, and I think that compact will begin a process of really devolving or decentralizing those compacts local level, where communities and the state and businesses, as well as labor, are ushered to determine their destiny for an inclusive and a just community, for our president, a just society, because without a just society, without a compact, it's going to take us a long time to address our problems of poverty, inequality, as well as unemployment.
Lumkile, you speaking about the president and our president Cyril Ramaphosa, who has stated the social compact, this just society, this inclusive society, creating the social compact. Now, the question that I want to ask you, Yusuf, is who drives this social compact? Who drives this inclusive economy? Is it driven from government? Is it driven from the private sector? And do these stakeholders have the will to be able to create this inclusive economy?
That's, Yusuf, that's important. So we need the social compact, but everybody's got to contribute and everybody's got to play a role, right from civil society, private sector, your faith-based sector, and then government and the state has got an important role to play. But I think it's all around the shift towards making sure that we're changing the conditions on the ground, that we're making sure that the poorest of the poor, the most vulnerable in our society, are going to be taken care of, and we're going to create systems for them to uplift themselves and create self-sustaining communities. So in that regard also, communities can also begin to take initiative, greater initiative in terms of beginning to build new models for how they can uplift themselves. And organizations, NGOs, civil society organizations got an incredible role to play in terms of supporting some of that. But then the state as well. The state's role becomes critical. And I think, if the president is talking about a social compact and we're talking about issues of globalization, etc., we need government, we need our state to be an ethical, capable developmental state. And a developmental state will take that orientation and posture to begin to close the gaps where the market is not working, to make sure that people don't fall through the gaps. So that developmental state will be with that orientation to actually facilitate also this community-driven development type of models. And I think there also lies the hope. When we're talking on this topic of globalization versus, states and countries doing it by themselves, etc., I think we've got to find the right balance. But with all the challenges that we have, and we know there's a lot of things that needs to be fixed within our current government and within the state, but I think we have to work towards an approach where we make sure, and we have to also build accountability, and everybody's got to become part of this accountability system to make sure that we all, because the state is our state, and we have to make sure it's going to be working for us, and working for us in an equitable and fair way, and in a developmental way, in a transformative way. And I think that's where the hope is, where we can rebuild a new vision for the country, right? And a vision built on the kind of things we've been talking about within the socio-economic justice framework. But we've got a competitive advantage that we can take to the rest of the world. And I think we just need to go back to our heritage, as you spoke in the start, our heritage of liberation. We brought about political freedom. We've had some of the greatest leaders in the world that have actually been at the forefront of our liberation, right? And we actually brought to the world some of these approaches on, we've got it in our constitution, bringing about a dignified society, a human rights-based society, etc. Now we've lost touch with that, and I think we need to find that again, and that must actually become our competitive advantage as a nation, where we can use some of those values that drove us, that drove our political freedom, and we use those same values to reposition us even globally. And I think that can be done. We need to reconnect with the Constitution, our constitutional principles, and be able to begin to rebuild this new socio-economic model that we're talking about.
Okay, that is rather insightful. We obviously have run out of time. We could have spoken so much longer, but the important points that were brought out through this discussion, thanks to Lumkile, thanks to Yusuf. And I know, Yusuf, you're doing great work with Musa, the Movement for United South Africa. It's a civic organization, and this is where civil society takes control. I think this one thing that has come out very strongly here, and our president is also saying it, is that I think one fault we have as South Africans is that we leave our future, our vision, and our emancipation to others. May it be big business, may it be government, and then we end up being armchair critics that there's all this corruption. Yes, there is all of that. But the power lies with the individual. And if we start with ourselves on the right moral and ethical, care-based empathy for our employees, doing just business, if we start there, the entire society builds a more just, empathetic economy. Caring, Lumkile spoke about as employers, allowing for participation of employees into your business, incentivized schemes, community development, where we living in communities where there's impoverished people. How do we use our resources to work with the impoverished people to build up? And this is where civic organizations like Musa play a very, very critical role in redesigning, in redeveloping, in ushering this new socio-economic paradigm. And that is the opportunity for each one of us. On that note, please visit our website, visit our social media handles, and let's start having a conversation about how we can all participate in creating this new socio-economic paradigm. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.